All right, in my never-ending quest to help you race faster, I want to talk about adaptation today, because adaptation is really what we're all looking for as runners, right? We don't actually want tempo runs or long runs or high mileage. We don't want hill workouts or those hard VO2 max workouts. We want the end result of all those activities. And the end result of all those activities is you getting stronger, you gaining more endurance or more speed. The only way that happens is through adaptation. We have to actually change the structure and function of your body. So I'm here at the whiteboard today because I want to talk about this adaptation process. I often say, actually not often, I say before every episode of the Strength Running Podcast, if you understand the process of improvement, you're going to be a much better runner. And that's because if you understand what contributes to you actually getting better, what type of stresses cause the positive adaptations that we want, you'll be able to build more of these into your training. So let's take a look at how adaptation occurs. This is where the magic happens, right here. This is our stress adaptation curve. See this right here? That is a workout or a long run or a series of weightlifting exercises you might do in the gym. This is our training stress. After we train, we're actually in a worse position than before we trained. We're sore, we're tired. We are less capable as runners after a big long run or a workout or a high mileage week. So this right here is stress. This right here is fatigue. And this right here is soreness. But what happens if that training stress was appropriate? We're going to experience all these things, and then we are going to adapt. This up here, this is called super compensation. What happens here is your body says, hey, I didn't like that long run you just did. That tempo run was not fun. So what we're going to do is we are going to build a little bit more strength. We're going to add some more mitochondria to your cells. We are otherwise going to adapt to that training stress. So the next time you decide to go for a 20-mile run or you go do a series of hill repetitions, you are in a better position to do exactly that. Now, a couple quick notes before we move on. Right here, this is where you want to be doing a lot of recovery running. This is great zone 1, zone 2 effort when you are fatigued, when you are tired. Up here, after you've experienced this adaptation, after you've experienced super compensation, this is where you want to race. This, if your training is structured properly, this is the point at which you want to put yourself in a position for a peak performance. You don't want to do it when you're tired. You don't want to do it on this upward trend of recovery. You want to do it when you're fully recovered. Now, you might also be asking yourself, what's going on right here? Why does this line continue to go down? Well, what happens is if you don't add more training stresses to your training program, if you do a long run and then stop running whatsoever, you are gradually going to become detrained. This can happen when you stop training altogether. It can also happen during periods of substantially reduced training. So you might be used to running 40 to 50 miles a week as you're getting ready for a marathon. If you all of a sudden trained for a marathon running 20 to 30 miles a week, you're going to be more detrained because your body is used to much more training stress, and you're not going to be as well adapted to the demands of the marathon. So we definitely want to continue adding training stresses as you are ready for it after recovery. Once you're adapted, boom, you add another training stress, and this process continues. But let's look at what happens when we don't have the ideal scenario, because sometimes it doesn't work out the way that we want it to. Trail running can be demanding. the technicality of the terrain, all those rocks and roots and uphill sections, downhills, the elevation changes and turns of trail running are also demanding, and they require demanding gear. And that's why I'm thrilled to partner with Bombas. Use the link in the description with code STRENGTH20 to save 20% off your first order. If you're running trails, then you need a durable, high-quality sock that has really great stitching, that is really going to protect your feet when you're out there on those technical trails. And I'm thrilled to partner with Bombas because they make exactly that. High-quality socks that have excellent stitching, that also are just really attractive. And I love supporting a company that is doing such great work to help runners. They have great stitching, and what I really love about that is that you're not gonna find a lot of stitching near the toes. So if you're someone who gets a lot of blisters, especially if you're out there trail running, Bombas socks are gonna protect your feet with a very, very small stitching right near the toes on their socks. Plus, what I love about Bombas is that these might be not only the most comfortable socks you've ever worn, but the most charitable socks you've ever worn. For every single pair that you purchase, Bombas is gonna donate a pair to the needy. So it's a win-win for you, for your feet, and for communities that need that extra support. So use the code STRENGTH20 at checkout with the link in the description of this video. Save yourself 20% off with your first order at Bombas. And thank you, Bombas, for helping support our YouTube channel. All right, let's make another stress adaptation graph, but this time, let's not have a good training stress. Let's have a training stress that's just not strong enough. So here we have our baseline fitness. We have our training stress. It's not that big. We're just not really going to experience much adaptation. We're not going to need much recovery. We're not going to be too fatigued. We're not going to adapt as much as we can. And we're probably not really going to become too detrained because we're not doing enough to really become trained in the first place. So this is what happens when you have a period of time where you're not really training very hard. It might be okay to maintain your fitness for a little while, but if those training stresses are simply too small, if they're just not strong enough to elicit the type of physiological adaptations that we are looking for, well, we're just not really going to improve at the rate that we want. So this is what happens when you're used to running 50 miles a week and all of a sudden you start running 25 miles a week. This is what happens when you're used to running a workout every week and now you're really not, or you're just running a very easy workout every week. You're just not going to get the same adaptation for all the training that you're doing. So that kind of a training adaptation graph is what happens when you're just not training very hard. Now, what happens most of the time is that runners sometimes do too much too soon before they're ready for it. What happens when the training stress is too high? When you do a 20-mile long run because you got lost and you actually were really only ready for maybe a 15 or 16-mile long run. What happens then? Let's take a look. Here's what happens with a stress that's too strong. When you do a workout way too fast. Always listen to your coach's pacing prescription. The stress is just too much. This is where you could become overtrained if you do too many of these large training stresses. You could also get an injury. But what happens is that because you don't just take all this time off after a big training stress, what happens is your recovery takes a lot longer, your future training becomes compromised because you have to focus more on recovery, and you don't get as much adaptation. What we want is that middle ground, the first graph where we looked at. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's just right. It's right in the middle. We want the highest curve possible, and that only comes with proper training. Now, this is all very theoretical. This is what you might find in a coaching curriculum where we talk about stress adaptation. How do you actually know if the training stresses that you are subjecting yourself to, the mileage, the workouts, the long runs, how do you know if you're in that Goldilocks zone? If your training isn't too hard, but it's not too easy, it's just right. The best way to look at this, number one, is to look at your performances over time. Are you steadily improving? Are you avoiding A lot of injuries? Are you avoiding overtraining syndrome? You're probably in the right place for you. Another thing to look at is your training journal. And I hope you're keeping an analog paper training journal, because Strava is great and all those platforms are wonderful, but if you're automatically uploading all of your training data instead of manually writing it in a training journal, there's very little opportunity for reflection. And this is the kind of reflection that really helps you better learn from your training, from your mistakes, and from your successes. So you have to look back. What kind of workouts, long runs, mileage levels produced better performances? When you had a bunch of bad races, what was your training like? If you're getting injured or if you're experiencing OTS, overtraining syndrome, what is the training that's contributing to those results? This is the best real-world method for determining if your training is appropriate. Are you improving? Look back on your training and reflect. Why am I getting injured? Why do I feel overtrained? Or why am I running all these PRs? The answer to that is the answer to this question. Are you training too much, too little, or just right? So there we have it, runners. This is our stress adaptation curve. You can see there is such a thing as training too little and training too much. We want to be in that Goldilocks zone, just right to elicit the adaptations we want so that we can ultimately become faster runners.